Well, I really hope you enjoyed that piece. I thank my son for giving me these DVDs. And boy, it certainly added to my appreciation. That second restoration, seeing all this stuff, totally amazing. Totally amazing. Some of the things that happened during and after and because of World War II, simply amazing. Anyway, our dope is dry. We're ready to get back to working in the shop. I certainly think that was a story worth telling and worth remembering. Oh boy, this morning it is cold. As we get ready to go down the shop, it is brutal. Actually, the thermometer said it was 10. We have ice on the pond. The pond cover blew down overnight, and we got our work cut out for us before we even get down there and start trying to finish up some of that tissue work. But we never want to forget feeding the birds. We forget this even early in the morning like this, and I feel guilty all day long. Now, I've been real careful about sanding this piece, especially around the fillet area. I'm not sure if you can see how nice the fillet looks like. It came out real nice. I want to put the final little sanding on it. I want to get the tissue, and especially this place that I want to have the double tissue up on the corner of the rudder, and I've been very careful about that. That is really, well, you know, we'll find out. But most important of all, this piece has an awful lot of these little angles. And each time I go through it, break the edge. One swipe of 320 paper. Plus we want to start working these edges up. And with the cold out there, wow. This came upon us like boom. And we were talking to people over the New Year's, Midgley and Brookins and them, and boy, they were freezing, and we weren't, but now, well, maybe we're all freezing now, I don't know. Anyway, once this is done, actually the next step here is to have another cup of coffee, because I'm still freezing from being outside with that stupid pond. That pond is, when it starts to freeze at least 2 or 3 times a day, I got to go out there and take chunks of ice and throw it all over the place. Anyway, we'll be ready to tissue this up. While this is drying, we could be sanding out the tissue that already has, I think, 3 coats of dope. I got to look at my little notes. But then we can start building up dope on one piece, sanding on the other piece. So we always have something drying, always something we could sand, one step at a time. As opposed to at the end, you would get to, well, and when I would paint the plane all at once, and I'd have a whole plane to sand, get up in the morning, spray it, and then game over. So this way we're always working on some part of finishing, some little piece that something's drying and something's sanding and something's getting ready for silver. Anyway, these parts are coming out nice so far. And the cold weather definitely helps let the dope dry out nice and slow. Now, of course, once this is sanded out, I want to pre-cut all of the pieces that I'm going to need. And the biggest thing I'm going to have to be very, very careful of is not to get anywhere down near that fillet. Stay away from the fillet. And I always want to, even though in this case it's really overkill, I always want to get one side done and flip it and do the other side, even though right now we get these 2 up here. And then I also want to get 2 smaller pieces. What's going to happen, I need to get corner pieces. Now I also need to get long, thin pieces here. And again, the key thing here is I can let them overlap, but I don't want them to get down by the fillet. They can be plenty big. In fact, that's fine for that. I'll cut an extra one of these because I have a feeling we're going to need it. A lot of times you lay one of these in and it doesn't fit exactly the way you want it. For whatever reason, I get that, I get that. The little fillets can be scrapped. Now I need pieces that are going to go down here. In fact, what I ought to do, if I could, is wrap this piece around here. Getting too cute. I don't know why it is, I'm always tempted to be too cute. That can wrap underneath, that'll be plenty, we'll trim it off. And then we need one long piece to go there. This can be over. Now a lot of times when you come up to a corner, yeah, it's nice if you could go around a corner, but sometimes it just gets too cute. It gets too involved. We'll take an extra one in case we screw that up. Now it's always, I always think, and again, this is what's evolved for me over the years, is having all the tissue cut first. Always put it on wet. I know people that put it on dry successfully, but every time I've watched them do it, it seems like it's a lot more work. It always seems like this way is the easier of the two ways to do it. Now I would always like to do the part that's going to need double tissuing first, because that'll give that a little extra, even though it's just a small amount of time to dry out. Get the tissue damp, not wet. Again, it's just pretty much a 50-50 mix. If you're in warmer weather, when it gets warmer, add more thinner, or add a little bit of retarder even. Now again, as always, a little complex part like this, you really have to figure it out ahead of time where you're going to put the joints. You just can't start laying tissue on. Well, you try to, as always try to make it as easy as possible too. Float on a good coat of dope. I remember doing a finishing demo with, if I remember right, Glenn and Lou, Dudka and Metter. We were going to show how to cover a Nobler at a club meeting one time, and of course you had 30-40 people, some of which had never seen the right way to cover, or the easy way to cover, or whatever we're going to describe it as. And what happened is, an awful lot of the people, the questions they were asking is, an example was, well, why would you cover the wood? You only need silk span on the open bays, right? And when we tried to explain, you know, that every part of the plane that has a finish will have silk span on it. The silk span is there for a lot of reasons, to help cover the grain, number one. Number two, to add the strength. Now a lot of planes, and a Nobler is probably one of them, have, you know, tissue tail, tissue this, tissue that. And in the old days, because the engines were not that powerful, every possible attempt was made to make the plane light. I mean, if you look at how difficult it is to build a Nobler, you probably could build 3 or 4 modern planes in the time it takes to build a Nobler. Because every compromise was made toward keeping a plane light. Now, it's good. It's still to your advantage to make the plane light, of course. But what happens is, some of the things like, well, building up a Nobler tail, if you've ever built a Nobler tail, you know, pretty labor-intensive stuff. And if you can do a more modern tail, even a foam tail, or even what we're doing on this ship, in a lot of ways, and to me, it just makes it a lot more fun, a lot easier. And once you see, or once you have the technique of how do you do these little pieces like this, and a take-apart plane, this is one of the advantages. Because if we were doing this tail, and right now the stab was here, doing that part would be very difficult. Well, every step of the way that we have a part in our hand, yeah, we have to make the fits. And you have to develop that skill, and it's a skill, of how to make the fits reasonably well. But once you have that, the rest of it is a real snap. And just, I remember going back to that old Nobler, and everybody was adding their 2 cents in, and the questions that came up were really excellent, because when you have a group of 20 or 30 people, there's people at every skill level that are adding their knowledge into it and making you put on a better demo. Now it's this little piece up here, and this is probably the only piece I really have to worry about right now. Probably right there is where it's the thinnest, so that I need to worry about it. So while it's wet, I want to get that piece right on there. And of course what I want to do is flip this right over and get the other side done, even though this part is probably not prone to warp. But I think once you see it, and John DeTavio has the best saying. John and I were renovating my old two-family house, and in the middle of renovating it, he'd look at me and he'd say, "You know how I learned how to do such and such a task?" He said, "I stole it with my eyes." And he'd go and watch somebody do something, no matter what it is, and the skills of building a house are a lot more crude than building a model plane. He'd say, "I watched the guy how he did this certain job, how he did that," and the next day I knew 90% of it. And I think modeling is the same way. If you can work with somebody one-on-one, that can help you. Boy, like I had Harold Price, of course, you grow very quickly. Or as Elliot Scott rightly says, you stand on the shoulders of giants. Well, that's all true, but I think the DVDs are a great way to just, if you just see it, sometimes that's all you need. Now notice I'm working extra material up into the fillet. I've got my double tissue on the spot that I've got the sheeting sanded. See, actually what I should have done is this leading edge piece should have a curve in it. I made it straight. But rather than go back now, it's you know, the horse is out of the barn. The horse is already in Kentucky. Okay, now see, in the time, because I've been doing this slowly, this has kind of dried out. It's no problem. But it shows you that, it gives you an idea of what the time window is, that Windex will work in your favor. You could use plain water. Some people prefer water. Some people prefer putting it on dry. What happens when you put tissue on wet too, you induce just a little extra of the, what I call the rubber band effect, where when it starts shrinking, the tissue shrinks and the dope shrinks, and all you have to do is look at a D-tube wing, a nobler wing, when you watch it dry and see how that happens. When it's wet, it's baggy, and all of a sudden it's tight. Well, it's that rubber band effect that adds strength to the model in that type of construction, or even in the most extreme circumstance in an I-beam wing. Now John, of course, was gracious when we were working on houses. Every time we'd be doing something, I'd make him stop and say, "Show me how you did that, show me how you did that." Now here's what's happened. John is really getting to the point, because he's going to be 85. We're going to have his 85th birthday, in fact, in a couple of weeks. But what's happened is John is unable to do a lot of the heavier stuff. Putting up a sheetrock ceiling, for instance. His endurance, and I think the last job we did was a 106 yards of carpeting, and I think that pushed him to the limit, and I don't want to do that anymore. But he was able to pass some of that information on to me. And because he was able to pass it on, I'll be able to pass it on to my son if he's interested. And my son has been working on his house constantly. He's learning the joy of owning an old house. This closet that they're making by Kajeski's just about done with it, in fact. It's really coming out nice, but he's learning the skills of spackling, the skills of various little things, and I wish they would make DVDs that would, like Windy DVDs, of how to do some of these projects, but the ones that are on television, I don't think they don't serve my needs anyway. They're cute, but they don't show me what I want to see. And I watched many of them of how to set tile and how to do things with a table saw, and the one part that I wanted to see, they left out. They were in a rush to get the commercial, I guess. Anyway, the rest of this is going to be kind of redundant. It's this part here that I wanted to show. The rest of it is just going to be fitting in a bunch of little pieces. And the idea again is to get this drying. While this is drying, I can be doing a detail, and I mean a detail sanding, because about the second or third sanding into a part, then I start to really candle it, and I start to really look for every little imperfection to get that substrate as nice as I can. And I mean, most of the tissuing is not a whole lot different than what we've just done. I always like to push it down. Now, in this case, if this were a stab or an elevator, I'd be really wanting to have both sides wet. I don't really care right now, but I want to have them wet anyway. And then what I'm going to do is kind of let these, because these are going to be, if anything, prone to warp more than anything else. And so while this is drying, I can pretty much just tissue the rest of it. And the trick is always get both sides wet at the same time, let them dry at the same time. And how many people do you know that build a beautiful plane, you get all done, and it's got a warp and a wing, and it didn't have the warp in there when they built it? Well, a lot of times it's something that you can just, in one step, you can eliminate it or minimize the effect of it. Now that's going to dry before I go on. I'll do the rest of this off camera. All these little pieces are just redundant. And when I get back, I want to start sanding out those parts, and I want to show up close just how detailed of a sanding is going to go into all those tail pieces, because in the next couple of days we're going to hopefully get them up to silver. And we're coming up on, Joe's going to try to be here, I think 4 more days, Joe will be here. We haven't confirmed yet. But once we have that session, we're going to be putting his wing in the fuselage. He's a little ahead of me on that. Now what I find is the easiest to do sometimes on these little pieces like this, or like the trailing edge, this piece, just let it dry. It trims off a lot easier. When you go to trim it with a razor now, you don't really get a nice edge. But we'll put this aside to dry. And believe me, in this temperature, that heating vent is drying up. I can't get it too close to the heating vent because it'll dry in 5 minutes, but the heat is on, baby. We have ice on the pond and hot coffee in the pot. Now, as these parts have dried up just beautifully, there's a couple of things. Every time I get up, the dope has dried, and we probably have 5 coats on this legit, but I always try to sight it to make sure I haven't somehow gotten a warp in it, because having these parts, especially when they're this thin, they have to be razor flat to be real effective. When this is directing air, a part this thin is going to be really effective out at the tail. And I hope we're going to obviously have pushed the bar up a little bit because of the scale look of it, but now I find, and this is just a perfect piece. This is an old, when they used to use SIG landing gear blocks in planes. This makes a perfect little sanding block. I want to get in at all those hinges. Most of all of the edges. But I cannot, even in my wildest dream, emphasize how important that is. Because when this is done, every one of these edges is going to be light reflective. And all you have to do is just break the edge. If you don't break the edge at the end, it has this little funny look that I don't know how to describe it, but every time, either doping, sanding, or whatever, before I even do the part, I want to break the edge. Otherwise, all the time you put into fits and finishes, it's kind of, well, not wasted, but deteriorated. And once those edges are broken, then, of course, then I can sand each part. Now, it just happens, this is the part of building a model that I find is really, it's challenging, because to get this substrate on here perfectly flat where it's adding strength and not add 10 ounces to the plane. I'm willing to add 7, I'm not willing to add 10. And I know from past experience, 7 is doable. The finish is certainly concourse winning. And it's enough finish that you can rebuff little spots, touch up spots. But once you get up into the 10-ounce range, I think the CG gets distorted, although Richard Oliver had a great idea that it probably is more true than not. If you were going to use an automotive finish, on a design. Let's say you're going to do a Strega, a common design, a Strega. You're decided, I'm going to paint this with automotive paint, which is going to add a certain extra amount of weight. You could lengthen the nose moment just a little bit. But the thing is, when you do that, now you're adding weight in lengthening the nose, adding weight behind the CG, and what happens is then the overall weight always seems to be too much. When you go in the other direction, you lighten the finish and shorten the nose, everything gets better. In every way it can get better. So, well, right now I've got maybe a half hour apiece to sand these out, detail sand them, get every edge, every corner. They'll be ready for the next coat of finish. Now I'm still brushing it. It is way too cold to spray out there today. So what my goal is to get maybe 2 more coats brushed on. Tomorrow it's supposed to stay really cold like this. The paint, it's almost impossible to paint out there when it's this cold. At 10 degrees, it's or 12, whatever it is, it's just impossible. And there's other things I can do, and actually if I run out of everything else, I'll just start working on the wing. Now Karen just invited me up here to see. Look at that, oh my God. She says the smell of the meat now is canceling out the smell of the Brodak dope down the cellar at 12 degrees. Oh my God. No, I fixed it once already today, but you know, this Midgley made this pond cover and it's lasted 4 or 5 years already, but it's all the grommets are ripping out of it now. Every time the wind blows, every time we get ice on a pond, it's a problem. Oh, I got another cup of coffee. You can't imagine, if you live in a warm weather climate, you can't imagine what that tastes like on a day like today. What did they say? It went up 10 degrees or something, or 12?
It's not even that yet.
Not even. Oh man.
It's cold in here.
It's cold.
The minute you open the window for the birds, it's freezing.
Well, I got to refill the bird feeder. See, like on a normal day, we refill it twice. On a day like today, they eat it maybe 5 times a day we fill it. It's crazy, but hey, they're not even there. They run away when I fill the feeder. But this is the secret. And the secret, if you're doing Brodak dope in the house and your wife's complaining, tell her to get a pot roast going. What is this, a roast beef or a pot roast?
Pot roast.
That's a great idea.
Yeah, but it gets rid of the smell of the dope.
Hey, this tip brought to you by Karen Artnowski.
Of course, between now and spring, I'm making pot roast every day.
Of course, we're going to be eating pot roast for 6 months here. Now, what's nice about once these parts all dry up, an example is this little piece here, or these, I like to let it just dry, and then it just gets a lot easier to trim. Get a brand new blade, of course. And then we'll sand this down and start getting our coats of dope on. Now it also gives you, there's a little benefit to doing this type of stuff that it's hard to define, is when you're doing a whole plane at once, there's something about it. It's like I have to sand out the whole thing. Oh, I have to sand, oh geez. Where what you do with this is it's like you do a little bit here, a little bit there, a little bit here, a little bit there, and it never gets overwhelming. It's probably easier to digest little bits and pieces of this than it is when you look at, let's say you look at a whole plane and you know, geez, you're going to be 6 or 8 hours of sanding and your arm's going to turn into a rubber band or something. And it also, in my case, every year I need this little, I call it like a warm-up period, that I need just to decide or just to get my little technique down pat again. Now in this case, where we have the double tissue, it's hard as a rock now. That's perfect. This is ready to sand out and start getting coats of dope on. And that's the whole saving here, is that there's always something to do, and it's always a bite-sized part. It's never a big giant amount that just takes a whole day to do. We're doing it in little bites. And it's funny how every coat, once I get my little rhythm going, every coat just seems to get a little nicer, and the parts start to come to life. And it's almost like, it's not a good analogy, but like Brian's little birds. Every day these parts start to look a little more like birds and a little less like whatever whatever they look like in the very beginning there, but anyway, Brian's 4 birds are doing great. He's as happy as can be. I think he's even got a home for one of them already. And again, this is the part you never want to leave out, is every coat. And I call this detail sanding, but for lack of a better word, well, it's something that I enjoy. Now, there's always a little spot if you happen to sand through the tissue. Well, you can always put a little patch there at this point in time. All of the flat areas I want to get with a block if possible. I know I'm going to have to dress up my fits when I get to that point. And with each coat of dope, it just gets to be more and more of an aeroplane, and it's so rewarding to me to see how it evolves, and how each morning when I come down to the shop, it's more and more like what I had envisioned months and months ago and been thinking about all last summer. Oh man, our pond cover blew down again. I can't believe this. Solid ice. Solid ice. Oh man. What a great day to be a modeler. Not a whatever it would be that you're out here. Oh man. See, Dave made this. Look, it's deteriorated. I don't even think this is worth saving, but it got us through. Oh, there's my friend the squirrel up there. We've been feeding the squirrels, we've been feeding the birds. Everybody's suffering this winter. Wow. The only thing saves us is this bubbler down here making bubbles. Without that, we're dead. Now, you would think all the ice on a pond would deter my enthusiasm for Spitfires. Well, I get started to do the daily work and do the email for today, and the first email, Rich Woolbridge sends me some inspirational Spitfire photos here. I'm not sure what the significance of the little checkerboard on the rudder is, but that sure is a five-bladed prop. See, these are the little things I'm not sure. Let's see if we can see the little logo up on the nose. And maybe this identifies that it's a privately owned one. That doesn't look like, I don't recall ever seeing checkerboards on a Spitfire unless this is a privately owned one. And you never know, because unlike the Americans who turn all their Mustangs into Reno racers, the Brits seem to feel differently, and they restored them. Kind of a different philosophy. Anyway, and they do some job of restoring them at Duxford, as I guess you've seen on that Blenheim video. And by the way, I have a couple more of those somewhere later in the, we got one on a Lancaster that's very similar. Okay, here in this photo you can see some, well, you really can't. I can't see what that is. And there's the old axe, so they can break their way out of it in case of a crash. Now see the R that's behind the cockpit, that does not look like prototypical writing. That the Brits, I don't recall ever seeing that type of a print with the lines going through it. But that might indicate this is privately owned, or not an exact restoration. Let's see if they have the mirror. Oh yeah, there's the mirror. I don't know what there is. There's always something about those five-bladed props that, I don't know. Maybe I'm the only one that feels that way. And that big spinner. Oh, I can't wait to get, see what's going to happen. I can't wait to get moving on this. The problem is, while our dope is drying, we've been working on other projects, and what's going to happen is where eventually we want to connect with Joe and get the wing in his fuselage. And then I was thinking right after that I'd start my wing, but if I get a little, maybe I'll get a day or two ahead on this. I never do know. Because both of our schedules are variable because of a lot of things way beyond our control. Early Model 1. Early rudder. And I've seen that writing before, that print type. A real late model one here. There's some unusual squadron lettering. Typically, it's always, well, it's not a 3-letter and a 1-letter, but again, you never know. Look at that rudder. You never know when something is being and we certainly don't know every one of them, when it's been restored to some other configuration, but as I'm looking at the lettering, it would typically be 1-letter, roundel, and then 2 letters. The more typical and those were squadron markings. The idea was that you were supposed to be able to visually see which, I guess, even in flight from plane to plane, who your comrades were, or even as planes flew by, which ones were flying by. I'm not sure, of course. And the clip wing. Clip wing with a 5-blade. I guess they're doing an engine run up here. Look at that propeller freezes in a freeze frame on a camera shot. Something about those 5 blades. And I keep thinking about that Spitfire that was in Texas and is gone now. We're going to miss that when we go to Houston this spring. Or I should say to Richard's new house, which is in outside of Houston by 70 miles, I think. I don't understand, and I don't know, again, what these markings are, or if they're prototypical, but the thing with Spitfires, so many variations, and it's just impossible, and I think impossible for me to know them all anyway. Early model 3-blade Merlin with the fishtail exhausts. Anyway, thanks to Rich, we do enjoy seeing these pictures every day. We really do. It really brightens my day up. Now we got some pictures coming from Gerald Champ of his crutch for the new ship he's working on, that we assumedly very soon are going to start working on his cowl mold as soon as we get the plug from him. Let's see what these pictures look like. Now it looks like a PA65, and this looks like a pretty unique crutch, but I'm not sure. Now this is, I think, a modified Pat Johnson design, and we've seen many of Gerald's ships that, well, Mike Costello had one. I had one of his P-51s at one time. The workmanship was absolutely perfect. The fuselage sides with the formers laid out. That looks like a nice hefty body there. Gerald, as always, I'm jealous of how nice and clean your shop is. Don't you just hate that when you go to Joe Adamusco's house? Even the shop is like a hospital ward. Now I haven't seen the plans to the Thunderbolt, so I don't know. This crutch, I assume, bolts right in. It's somehow. I'd like to see how. I'd like to see how this, as you get this crutch mounted into the fuselage, how it all lays out. This is interesting stuff, and I hadn't seen this. This is apparently from Pat Johnson's plans. I have to see how that mounts in. Anyway, we always appreciate the people that take the time to share their projects with us. And Jer, that's going to be some cowling. Let me tell you something. I'm looking at that cowling. I'm going to try to make a mold when Gerald finishes the plug. Make some kind of a mold for that. And we had talked about if the air outlet flaps would be open, let some air out of there. Yeah, that probably would be a good idea. Anyway, I hope we're going to see more of these in the near future. And thanks a lot. Well, and thanks to everybody that shares. God, we got this internet, and it's good that you can use it for something beside, you know, just the terrorist activities that these people always send in spam. Now this morning we have the best of all worlds. I got up nice and early, My objective was I wanted to get all these parts sanded out. One more time. It looks like we're closing in on having enough clear. But again, you never know until you get that last coat on. I want to get this last coat of, what I'll try to do, I guess, is spray a coat of clear. And I'm going to try to detail these parts out, of course. Spray a coat of clear on, let it dry. It looks like it's warming up a little bit. But we're not in sunny California, that's for sure. But as I'm closing in on this, I don't want to put so much clear on that first coat of silver looks perfect. Because if I do that, then I know for sure I've defeated the whole purpose of trying to have a light dope finish. I don't want to have, I want to be right on the cusp of having one more coat, silver, and then see the dry spots and get that last little bit of silver on. I always finish off sanding each piece now that I'm up hopefully near the last coat, just to make sure the block gets all the high spots off. Try to keep the shape, try to keep the edges, but it would be really nice if it warms up a little bit out there anyway, and we can get the silver on. Now, the reason I'm trying to push a little bit on the silver is we're going to have company for the next couple of days, and I really, this is in silver and it's up by the heating vent drying, it'll sand out beautifully. Also, we're going to prepare for Joe's visit, and in not far down the future, we're going to have Dave and Sharon here. So we're getting to that point of the year where if I can get something sanded and get some sprayed and get it up drying, I'll feel like I'm way ahead of the game. And of course, all the sanding is just redundant. But each time I do this, it's just a little bit nicer, a little bit nicer, a little bit nicer. And then it looks, here's the scenario, it looks real good. It looks like, oh, I got it. And you put the silver on and you want to go drive a stake through your heart. But when that happens and you see that first coat of silver has dry spots, you know you haven't gone over and put too much clear on it. And that's our real objective here, is not to get too much clear on. So before I even, get the pot of coffee cooking here, I want to get some of this sanded down. When I get a nice early start, I tend to get a lot done during the day. And I don't have to do it, but I just really would be happy to get these in silver today. And it's always nice to have a little goal like this. And actually, once this is in silver, if I do have some extra time, I could start working on the wing. Now, every one of these pieces, I'm trying to identify exactly what it is that I'm looking for. And it's difficult to do that. But the one scenario I know that I've tried in the past that has really not worked well at all is I tried very early on to say, oh, I'm just going to put a lot of clear on. And I remember several people doing this to where the plane looked like it was coated with saran wrap and then sand it off. See, what I'm trying to say is it's better to put it on, take it off, put it on, take it off several times, because each time you're letting that wood swell and come back, swell and come back, as opposed to one big sanding and then when you put it on the next time, Now, I don't know that I'm close here yet, because as I'm sanding this through, and I thought I'd mention this, I see there are I can see the dry spots. So what I'm going to do is when I go to spray, and I'll spray it. It's warm enough out there now that I can spray, even though it's not warm. What I'll do is I'll spray on a coat of clear. Hopefully that'll seal up any of the dry spots. Let that dry an hour or two, and then spray on the silver. And the goal here is, and it's kind of a simple goal, even though I don't need to have a goal like this, or there's no real logical reason to have it, I find that I work better when I pick a reasonable goal for myself and say, I want to get this accomplished today. I want to get this accomplished tomorrow. I don't just leave it random and like daydream the day away or whatever. And in my case, it's always nice to be a little bit ahead, because you never know when I'm going to get an order for tune pipes that's going to absorb a better part of a week, or in the case like of the carbon tanks, where I have to factor in several days a couple hours. So no matter what your routine in the shop is, I think it's always better to be a little bit ahead. And it's always better to have, in this time of year especially, have something drying. And once it's drying, it seems like the next step as you're working, like for instance, as we're working on the wing, knowing that this is in silver and it's drying, well, here's an example right here. Just thinking of something, trying to come up with an example. When we go to put the last final sand out on this with 1200 or 600, I mean, the fact that this has dried for several days, the sill span's all nice and tight, everything's nice and dry, it's stayed dead flat. When you try to put too much finish on in a short amount of time, it seems like that's when it gets to be hard to sand off, difficult. It seems like it's like pushing a brick uphill. When you have extra drying time between coats, like we had on this, and like we're going to have on these parts, it seems like these parts, they just go a lot quicker. And I'm not sure that's the magic bullet, but it's certainly one of the bullets, is have a good amount of drying time between coats, and the more drying time, the better. There's, with dope, let's say this has been sitting here a week or 2 weeks. Now, if I were to wet sand this out after a week, this is going to go instantly. If I do it the next day, it goes. But because what happens is the dope gets harder and harder and harder and harder, and the sandpaper cuts it off instead of mushing it off. The harder, and a dope surface tends to get harder and harder and harder for quite a long time, until ultimately, if I were to take one of the planes that are 10 years old and buff them out, it's amazing. You can buff out a 10-year-old dope finish almost instantly. So that's what our goal is here today, is get this stuff in silver. It warmed up enough at that I get this first, the coat of clear on here. I sprayed it on, of course. This is going to dry an hour or two, but while it's drying, I'm going to be working on my stab elevators. And it looks like it is warming up out. Boy, there was no way you could spray the last couple of days. It was brutal out there. Nice now, though. And again, it's best if this dries a couple hours so everything shrinks back down before we put the silver on. Now I wanted to take a little break from the sanding here. I want to share a little miracle with you. This is really true. You can't make this stuff up. And boy, do I wish I could, if this were possible. Now, I had a message on my machine in December of this year, about a month ago, about a fella that I knew not real well named Paul Cittrell. And Paul, over the last few months, before December I'm sure, around November, passed on. And his wife had called me, and she said, I know he appears on some of your videos. If you could just make me a copy, I'd really love that. And, you know, I'd be willing to pay you. Of course, we're not going to try to make money off Paul's memory. But what happened this morning, as I'm sanding away here, I just happen to have plugged in a video. Now, what I've been doing is converting all my VHS tapes to discs, and I do them whenever I'm not making copies for somebody else. There's a whole stack of the ones I've converted in the last week or so. But all of a sudden this morning I found a disc that has Paul's, well, we were flying with him at Middlesex and stuff. So I'm going to call his widow, and I'm sure she's going to be thrilled to know that, and it's a sad thing. This is a part of, I don't know, I guess one of the things that when I spend hours and hours sanding here, I'm either listening to music or, in fact, hey, here's Paul right now. And the late Paul Cittrell. And I'm sure his widow is going to be thrilled. I found 2 tapes already today that he appears on. And so I'm sure, in the spirit of Christmas, I'm sure she's going to love just having a copy of them. One of the little things we just totally enjoy. And we're able to do, and as more and more of us get older and have health issues and pass on, well, what I did, I got one, you may remember him, that's what his plane looked like. And in fact, there's Paul right there. But and here's the bottom line is I'm going to wait till it warms up even more. And Karen just told me around lunchtime it's supposed to go up to 18 degrees, so I think I'll wait. I've got one part at a time sanding out here. I got to do the stab yet. And she's awake, and we're feeding the birds and sanding and making these copies for Paul. But the next step on this is going to be, once it warms up, we'll get the clear on. That was pretty brutal spraying that part this morning. Get the clear on these, get the silver on, and boy, will I sleep well tonight. Well, at least one thing, the sun is out. Can you imagine? This is almost unbelievable. I haven't seen the sun in so long. And what I'm going to do is the part that I put the clear on earlier in the day looks like it's still a little dry. I'm going to give that another coat. Again, remember, a spray coat is really about 1/3 of a brush coat, so even if we give it 3 coats, I want it to have a little bit of just a little bit of a shine on it. I'm sure we can even show this. And you can see it's just a little dry around the edges. And in this cold weather, this is going to take about 2 hours to dry up before we put the silver on, but we got to take what we got here. We got to go to war with the clear we already have. I always try to use the sun when we have it like this to kind of see, kind of handle it. But as Joe so correctly put in his email, the day you put the the silver on, be prepared to be disappointed. Now there's only one spot I can't get, of course, right where my fingers were holding it. It's always a little touchy, a little iffy anyway. I'm not sure I can candle this, but you can see if you look at it, there's definitely some dry spots. And rather than waste a coat of silver, if I see dry spots in the clear, I know there's no way the silver is going to fill it. So may as well just give this another coat. In that area where we have the double tissue, looks like that's going to be a fine save there. Repair or whatever you want to say. And what's going to happen, it's going to be much later in the day because I know this is going to take a couple hours to dry. And it'll probably be even colder. But just knowing that this stuff is up on a rack drying tonight. And you can see kind of how that filled in. And I think we'll be ready for some silver on this. Now it's funny, the temperature goes up to 18 degrees and it feels warm after the last couple of days. Amazing. But in this cold weather, believe me when I tell you, the dope dries, lays down flat. And the real trick is if you can let it dry in some, like a cool area in a garage or something for half an hour, just till it's dry to the touch, and then put it up by a heating vent. Then you have the best of all worlds. See, and the other thing that really matters here, that really comes into this, is when it's cold like this, you don't need any retarder to slow the drying down. The temperature itself slows the drying down, so it's kind of the best of all worlds. You know, what happens is once you have a basic understanding of how lacquer dries, how you develop the bond between coats, how the different thinners react and retarders. It's just like being a cook. I'm trying to candle this. Just like being a cook, that you're able to really create some nice dishes. But and the rules are very simple. They're very basic 101. I think we've covered most of them, or all of them. Hopefully all of them. And once you're comfortable working with dope and lacquer, boy, you can put some really nice lightweight finishes on ships. And in the case of the Spitfire, it's what allows the Spitfire to be the Spitfire. Because if we were going to put an automotive finish on here where it was very heavy or heavier, we'd have to cut back on some of the scale details, the cockpit, the landing gear detail, or something. Or just live with a plane that's overweight, either one. Now I'm going to put these out in the garage basically a half an hour, and they dry to the touch, and then up by the heating vent. Well, there is still plenty of ice on the pond. And every day I've got to go out here 2 or 3 times, chip this up, make sure that hole stays open with the bubbles, the leaves all freeze in the ice. You just don't know what you're missing when you live in a warm weather climate. You just can't imagine how much fun it is to do that on a cold day like today. It's just so much fun. So here it is a half hour later. Everything's drying up. We're going to give it an extra hour or so before. I got plenty of other things to do here. And maybe just before the day ends, shoot the silver on, because there'll be no more sanding on this until we get a coat of silver on there. But it's drying up beautifully. I really can't complain about it at all. And just having it up by the heating vent, that's the key to success after it dries out in the garage. Now normally when I look over a part, I'm looking for any little defects, and I see there's one right here. But there's a problem I'd like to address. You see this right here? This bubble? Now what this is from, I didn't leave the parts out in the garage long enough. The dope was not totally dry, and when I put it up by the heating vent, apparently the heat probably came on instantly, or whatever, because of this cold weather. The heat is almost always on. But when you see, I'm looking at the rest of it, looks pretty good. But when you see a bubble like this, what that's telling you is you've got too close to the heating vent. So what I want to do right in this area, and maybe I'll just sand out the whole part lightly. I don't want to take any chances, because that bubble is going to keep popping through. What it means is I don't have good lamination there. So the easiest way is just to bite the bullet and sand this down. And any other part, if there's any other bubbles, it looks like this is the only one, but that's one you want to duck. And the answer would have been, in our case, leave this outside for an extra hour. I kind of brought it in because I was looking to get out of the cold, and had it dried another half an hour, I would not have had to do this, but it gives me an opportunity to pass on one of the little tricks of dealing with this crazy weather that we have, and it isn't a problem. It's not something you can't deal with. You just have to know how to deal with it. And actually, in a lot of ways, it works in your favor. Now in this case, I'm looking at this, and I'm being real careful. Can you imagine right now to have that jump out at me? And I'm being extra fussy here. Actually, it really isn't a big deal, and probably this is a little bit on the overkill side, but if I take a brand new piece of sandpaper, I need to go down into where the bottom of that bubble is, so I'm not just sanding off the top of the bubble, and I may need to fill that with silver or whatever at some point in time. But even little things, little tips and tricks like this ultimately work in your favor. Now, I see there's a bubble right there too. But here's what I wanted to show is, here we can, let's see if we can do this really up close here. And I never know if I can get this up close. I can see where it's double tissue, it's still just a little bit dry, and identifying that dry spot. Now, sure, if I put 5 more coats of clear on this, that dry spot will disappear, but then I got probably 4 coats or 3 coats I don't need. And it's constantly chipping away at it is when you're all done with the model, that you don't wind up with that extra heartbreaking day that you put it on a scale and it's 5 ounces heavier than you think it should be, and it's tail heavy. and it's probably got a warp in it. So all these little do's and don'ts, I think they add up. Now I'm just going to play it totally safe. See, here's another little, see if we can, right there's another one, and what that is, that's just a spot where I'm going to very carefully from now on leave this out in the garage at least an hour. I was leaving it out there about a half an hour because it's that initial dry time that lets the dope, it does two things. It lets it just lay down and lets it get that nice shine on it. Anyway, I'll pick away at all of the pieces, get rid of any defects that I have in them, and as soon as I possibly can, and I don't know how long this is going to take, but hopefully get that silver on before it gets dark out there. Well, we made it. The sun is setting in the west. We're going to get this silver sprayed on here. And it is brutal right now. Now for sure, we'll leave these in the garage for a little bit longer. I don't want to run any chance at all. I'm going to get bubbles in the silver. Now a good little tip, especially in cold weather, if you're going to shoot silver, take a little ball bearing or a nut from a 440 nut, put it in the mix of paint and shake it up once in a while, because especially in the case of silver, it tends to sit down in the bottom. Now, because this is the first coat of silver, I want it to be a wet coat. We're going to sand this off. So it's probably what Bobby Brookins would call a double coat. But I want this to go on good and wet. See, you'd never want to put this on with an airbrush. You want it to go on wet. And if it's hot out, if you're in hot conditions, throw a couple of spoonfuls of retarder in there. And we will not be able to sand this till tomorrow, or, well, we have work to do tomorrow. We're going to be working on a kid's closet with Mike Kajeski, so this closet is becoming a monster job, but it's really looking good so far. Now that's a good wet coat. Bob Brookins is probably mad as hell at me for doing it this way, but let's see if I can see the little shine on it. And I'm never super fussy when I know I'm going to sand the silver off. It's the last coat I want to get on perfect. This coat for sure is going to make me sick when I look at it after it dries. But the long-range weather is that in a couple of days it's going to warm up to above freezing, so I'm not panicking. And I got the wing to work on if all else fails, and I got these, I call them the projects for the kids, the closet. And I got to make some fuel tanks, so there's never a time when that we're 6 touchdowns ahead, that's for sure. Whoa, the wind's blowing it away. That's funny, Karen is trained so well. When she hears the compressor go on, she immediately goes and makes a cup of coffee. She knows when I come in out of here, it's going to be Javalia time. Anyway, I see a lot of little flaws already that I didn't see earlier on. And that's the name of that tune. That's the name of Spray Silver. Awkward holding it that way. I watch these hot rod shows where the guy has a hermetically sealed booth and $10,000 worth of spray equipment and everything, and it's temperature controlled and who knows what else. Looks like we're out of paint. And I look at it and I say, yeah, but how tough is he? How tough is he when push comes to shove? Now I need more paint to finish this, but you can hear I've got a couple little ball bearings or something in here, especially in the colder weather. I think the paint just, the viscosity goes down is what happens. And again, because we're going to sand it off, it doesn't matter if we put some extra on there or whatever. When this stuff is a day or two old, it wet sands out just like butter, beautifully. Ah, it's top. Now talk about a funny story. You can't make this up. Karen gets her fingernails done by this. It's a Korean nail place. All the girls are Korean, and she knows them personally. They're very nice. They do a nice job, and of course, like most women, she enjoys having her nails all fancy and everything. And we go there. I drop her down there the other day, and Ann, her Korean nail girl, says, "Oh, you can't come in. You can't come in." And Karen says, "What's going on?" She says, "Oh, we eating kimchi. You'll be sick." And she says, "No, you don't understand. My husband sprays Brodak dope and he uses kimchi." These are kimchi jars, by the way. We get them from Rich Jacobone. You will be sick if you smell kimchi. You'll be sick if you smell what my husband does with your kimchi jars. So now we got the girl at the nail place saving us our kimchi jars. I just find that entertaining. Ugh. I love spraying silver. Of all the jobs there is, it's the job that you're guaranteed when you're done spraying, you're going to be disgusted with what you see. No matter how good it is, I don't know how to explain it. And Joe hit it right on the head. Be prepared for a disappointment. Anyway, as you can imagine, I'm dying to get this done. I'm freezing out here. My nose is starting to run. But that's a good trick with the little ball bearing or something, a nut, a prop nut. And we could put plenty on here. This won't even matter. And by the way, Brookins, this is one coat, but it's a windy coat. Not a Brookins coat. Well, him and I argue about that all the time at Brodax on the finishing demos. But the only difference is he's a professional and I'm an amateur, so I guess in the end I'm going to lose that battle. Anyway, that's starting to come out nice. I think Karen has ESP. She just yelled out, "The coffee's ready." Oh, am I ready for coffee? But anyway, we met our goal today, our little silly goal of wanted to get the silver on, wanted it to dry, or start drying anyway. And it looks like we will get that accomplished. Now I would be a lot more careful about how I'm spraying this if I were putting the last coat on, but there's no way on earth. I've never in all the years I've been building models, sprayed the silver and said, "Oh, that looks great." I've always said, "Oh, how many extra times am I going to have to sand it?" And when this dries up and it's all sanded, I hope what's going to happen, we're going to be well on our way to a 7-ounce finish. Well, I'll sleep good tonight knowing all that stuff is up there drying away. There's just something about it. Helps my sleep cycle. Now it looks like we got our daily dose of Spitfire pictures here while our silver is drying up. Late model, of course. And what's fun about having all these pictures, and I really hope Rich is somehow, some way going to be able to get them all on one CD, and we could just play them endlessly on the television every morning. Anyway, this looks like a, well, obviously late model bubble canopy version. 4-blade prop. Now this has the look of the hangar at Duxford, and maybe it isn't, I don't know, but if you've ever been to Duxford, you know, they have outbuildings, they have the main display hangars where all the planes are, and then they have these, I don't know, I guess you'd call them workshops where they're working on engines and hydraulics, and it's just awesome. If you ever go to England, do not miss Duxford. It's a little out of the way, but absolutely worth the trip. Elliot Scott took us down there when we were in England, and it was worth every minute of going out of our way. And this is one of the ones I like. Now, there's a little history to this G-Fire that I uncovered. First off, it has several different paint jobs. See this one? It has light blue lettering on the rudder. There's, apparently it was painted previously to this where it had the word G-Fire written on the fuselage, and it did not have that blue stripe in there, so... And it's certainly one of the things I've considered, and in my case, because it's a turtleback, I don't even care. That would be a cool paint job, and the G-Fire would just be a cool way of kind of having a fantasy version of the Spitfire. I really do like the G-Fire. And that blue one, see, it tugs at my heart. The blue version, the Photo Recon version that Joe so much likes, and the G-Fire. And you never know if I'm going to live long enough to have one of each in my collection. And here's the one I copied some of the graphics off the snaggletooth front end. Snaggletooth I-beamer. Anyway, we are from Rich Walbridge. We always enjoy getting these photos. Every day when I got to do my email, and then in today's case, we got a ton of work sitting over there. But when dope is drying, somehow the work goes easier. I don't know how that works out. And there's my favorite rudder. That rudder and a turtle deck. This one looks like it's got clipped wings. There's so many variants of this. 21T. I have pictures of 21T in my shop. That rudder. And I hope our rudder is going to look that realistic. I'm really putting a lot of time into this back end section and that smaller elevators. With the idea in mind, we're going to be able to get it a lot more scale than our previous efforts. And we'll see when Joe will be here soon. We'll see if he agrees with me that that's going to be a big upgrade. And of course, as Joe has so correctly identified, the ogive, that short nose, wide, thick, long tail, small elevators. And if we're going to be on, and of course some kind of really cool paintwork, and of course the Rojet 90 growl. Now what they did years ago, and I know this is part of the thing I learned in doing the Spitfires, whenever they did a prototype version, it had a P on the fuselage, and usually it was painted with the bottom yellow, I guess, so they could see it from the ground. Again, another neat paint job possibility. I just never have enough of this stuff. That is definitely one of the choices with the P. And you know what I like about it too is there really are no versions that are not appealing. Even these early ones with the small rudder, there's just something about it. And if anybody can ever figure it out and put it in a bottle, you'll be a very wealthy person. And here's the American P-51, the British Spit side by side. And of course, the one thing Richard hasn't uncovered yet, I'm sure they're out there, there are several, I think there were two, or at least two and maybe more, that were yellow. The whole Spitfire was yellow. Now we'll see if he could ever come up with some of them. But this is another picture of G-Fire that G-Fire 5-blade. And of course, thanks so much for sharing it. It always makes the paint dry better, Rich. And thanks a whole lot. Now, also in today's mail, we got some progress pictures from Gerald Champ on his Thunderbolt. I'm looking at how he did the spine here. That looks pretty cool. And I was curious how that crutch was going to go into the fuselage, but that looks like it's pretty well engineered. And he's using the spine method that we've, well, basically used on this. Nice countertops. Looks like he's got very similar to our countertops. These look like they have the little sparkles in them. I don't want to get you disgusted here, Jer, but what I'm noticing, because I just came in from the cold spraying, is those cups of coffee. Jer, if you haven't tried it yet, try Javalia coffee. I think you might get hooked. Look at the formulas in here. And by the way, we like Javalia coffee so much, and Ramo brought us some from Sweden, but what we did is we joined the Javalia Club where they mail you the coffee to the house. You don't even have to go shopping for it. And that Javalia factory is in Sweden, by the way, not far from Ramo's house, which I thought was pretty cool. Yeah, those countertops do look nice, Jer. See that? There should be 3 cups of coffee. One for you, one for me, and one for Joe. And we'd slap this sucker together, and that is nice. That's going to be a nice plane. And you know, when you do something a little bit different, there's just something, I don't know. Life seems a little sweeter. When I get doing a project that I don't know how it's going to turn out, when the newer it is and the more unusual it is, like those bombers or the Testarossa, I don't know how to explain it, but it's not like building a typical straight line plane where all you're thinking about is can you stick another trophy on your on top of your television or something. It's so different when you get involved in these oddball projects, and this looks like one of them. And every time I think I'm going to run into problems I can't solve, a year later I look back and we always, and usually with the help of some other people, we always have a solution. Anyway, Jer, go at this full bore and we will make you a cowling to die for. Just make us a good plug. Now this, ironically enough, is from our good friend Dennis Toth. He's dealing with some electrics and diesels. Down in Florida, he was a good friend of Wayne Triven, of course, who I can't even imagine I'd know half of what I know without Wayne's help. And Dennis had some great ideas, and we've built on them. Or as Elliot Scott has always reminded me, built on the shoulders of giants. Now, for people that don't know, Dennis lives in Jupiter, Florida, not far from Karen's brother, actually. He lives only a few miles away. His wife and daughter. And Dennis has a really cool job. He sells windmills, these offshore windmills. Very cool. Independently wealthy. He could buy the Javalia Coffee Company. Just kidding, Dennis, and I know. How fake is this? Look at Santa Claus here. Dennis, it's 80 degrees. Santa Claus, you should put him in his underwear out here. Come on up here, I'll show you some snow. Actually, this is a true story. I wish I could go back and find this in my videos. Dennis was up here visiting one day just around Christmas, and we had this tremendous snowstorm and my snowblower wouldn't start. And Dennis and I sat out there changing a plug and do whatever we did, I don't even know. Push starting it, kicking it. And that was Dennis's trip back to Jersey, where he originally came from. Anyway. And another one of Dennis's ships. Now, Dennis has always had a penchant for coming up with some unusual stuff. The stuff is always immaculately built. It always flies well. Not the run-of-the-mill stuff that everybody is getting. It's always something unusual. And we hope we're going to see Dennis at Brodex this year. If he can sell enough windmills and drink enough Javalia coffee. Look at that exhaust port on that motor. Oh, Jacobone, eat your heart out. He's got a Stuka stunt with a diesel. Look at this with a diesel. How cool is that? And 2 pilots. Even Jacobone doesn't have pilots. Very, very cool. Dennis, thanks for sharing. And actually, Dennis's wife called me up before Christmas, and we picked out some DVDs for him that I know he's going to enjoy. He's getting into electric now to add to his unique Air Force. I look forward to seeing some more pictures from him in the future. Dennis Toth. Now it's time. We got to fill some orders that we've had for quite a while for carbon fiber tanks. What I did, I spent an awful lot of time today. I polished this mold up like chrome, so this would really release nice. This mold is made about 300 parts right now, and spent a lot of time doing that. That looks like that would take 5-10 minutes. Not really. As Doran so well knows how long it takes to polish molds. I cut up all the carbon, and I wanted to finish out the day. Now see, this is what I like. Our parts are drying, and you can see how many dry spots there are going to be. Well, it's still better if that has a day or so extra to dry. So while that's drying, I always like to, and again, it's the hardest thing to try to convince people, is it's always your friend if you let dope dry. Just put it away, work on something else for a day or so. And when we come back to that, I guarantee you that's going to sand out really nice. Well, within the next couple of days we're going to be taking our tree down and all our decorations. There's a little bit of sadness to that part of it too. The snow's all melted. We got to do our walk today. Boy, but when you look back, my God, could it be better than this? And it seems like it was only yesterday and we were putting up our decorations, and I know the older you get, the quicker time goes by. Boy, oh boy, does it ever go by fast. And you look back and you just wonder, like I'm sitting here now, getting ready to go for our squirrel feeding walk, and I just wonder where the time all went. And I guess ultimately that's one of the lessons of life that you only learn when you get old, is how fast it all goes by. Time to walk off all those Christmas donuts and cupcakes and everything.
Cookies. Christmas
Cookies. As the miles go by, the cupcakes melt away. See if our squirrels are around today.
How many miles are we doing today? Is this 5?
5.
5 already, okay.
5. He's over by the garbage can. I've got him trained to eat out of the garbage can. This is something we haven't seen in a long time. The sun. Maybe we want to walk these cupcakes off and get home and sand out another coat of silver. It's time for Windy Peanuts. Oh yeah, you're costing me a fortune. What do you think, peanuts are cheap? What do you think, peanuts are cheap? You think I can deduct you on my income tax? You know what he does too? He takes them, because we give him so many here. You can see how many there are. What happens is he goes and hides them under the leaves or something over there. Then he probably felt like me, forgets where he put them. Now here's Blackie. Come on. Do you like Windy or not? There you go. There you go. It's my foot down there. Hey, another guy runs to the bank with the peanuts. See, when I play with the squirrels, then I got to jog to catch up. And Karen's already closing in on the 5th mile. Karen, you're killing me here. You think I'm a young man, I can keep doing this endlessly? Everybody's looking to see if I'm out of breath. Forget it! Oh, I'm a world-class runner. I gotcha. I gotcha. I'm passing you up. See, he thinks everybody gives him peanuts. You think everybody gives you peanuts? What are you, crazy? Who do you think the crazy one is? Who's the crazy one? Who's the kid? Yeah. You think Karen's gonna give you peanuts? Who gives you peanuts? Think Midgley gives you peanuts? Forget it. It's costing me a fortune. Costing me a fortune, baby. What happens every lap now, he comes further and further down the track to meet us. You know, he hides them in a, I don't understand what the hell it's all about. Now watch, he'll come back for another one. Come on. Here we go. Come on. Come on. Come on, here we go. Here we go. Here we go. The Peanut Patrol. And it was less than a year ago I had to pay an exterminator $500 to get these guys out of my rental property. Now what am I feeding them for? What's wrong with that picture? Hey, you cost me money. I'm gonna pull your tail. Found out an interesting fact about, see, I had always thought marathon was a word that was taken just to describe a 26-mile race, but it isn't. In the Greek, we were watching a show on history, the Persians were attacking the Greeks, and from the city of Marathon, the runner ran 26 miles to Athon. That's why they call it a marathon. Interesting. Anyway, the kids are all coming out here to play today. It really turned out to be a nice day. I bet Jacobone's out flying. There he is waiting for us. Look at this vulture. He didn't even finish what I gave him yesterday. Hey. Hey. Oh man. Every day when we pass this billboard, we try to decide, does that look like Bill Rutherford? Dave Midgley. Bill Rutherford? Dave Midgley. Yeah. Look at this. Come on. Come on. Here we go. Come on. Trained squirrels. Come on. Come on. Come on, you got that. Come on, here you go. There you go. What he does, he climbs the fence and he takes them out of your hand, but I'm afraid, you know, with he looks vicious. He might take a finger with him. Come on, Karen's got peanuts for you. Come on.
Oh, friend of yours?
He is. I take him off on my W-2 every year. I don't know if the IRS is going to catch on to this.
Just don't give his last name Squirrel.
Come on, baby. You can do it. I think he wants walnuts instead of peanuts. Fresh roasted peanuts. You're coming off on my income tax. It's absolutely true. We had to pay an exterminator to get rid of them over at the rental property, and they were feeding them. I don't know about that. It was sick or something here. She's eating peanuts that belong to the squirrels.
Oh, they're so fat already, they won't miss a few.
Hey, you were supposed to be dieting here, you know.
I know, but these don't have salt or anything.
Oh, salt isn't the problem, it's the peanuts. So, you're going to put the push on today?
No, I'm slowing down. It's this lap makes it 7 miles. That's it.
7 miles?
I quit.
Nobody's going to believe that, except me. I'm dying.
Yeah, I'm getting tired.
You're pushing me to my limit,
I'm getting
squirrel
tired.
girl. Okay, now that we're back from the Bataan Death March out there, what I wanted to look at, of course, it's exactly what I wanted it to be. I hope that it would be. I can see I've got a real dry spot up here I have to deal with, so it means a minimum sanding. I've got to work that fillet area a little bit better. Dry spots, and if you can identify the dry spots, look right along the edge of the fillet here, dry. You can see that. Once you know that's a dry spot, now that means minimum sanding. This side looks a little bit better. But again, all these little dry spots, what it means is that we, for sure, don't have too much material on there. Now, because this is dried up really an extra day, it should sand out relatively easily. But again, when I get to the dry spots, just very lightly, and when I put the clear on, the next coat of clear, I'll make sure I put some extra. I see there's at least 2 or 3 really dry spots. I just want to show one little area here and how long of a time I would expect to spend on it. And in this case, now I can see all those spots coming right up. Notice I'm not doing any extra sanding in here, as I know those are the dry areas. Now this is one area I really wanted to get perfect, because right in here it's a transition. And having that just transition right in there, that's a real, something I really would like to get that perfect. Because you know, you also pick up the airfoil section of the rudder there. And every time I sand this, I just want to, all of the edges, I just want to dress them off ever so slightly, not sand through. I want to get all the transitions, all of the edges, all of the places where this is going to become a parting line. All of the little edges of the fillets here, and I want to work that little fillet area. That's not up to my where I'm satisfied with it. Now, as I'm drying this part off, I'm looking around for anything. It looks like it's going to need an extra coat of clear, because as I put the clear on, and it still looks like I can identify the parts that pop right up into raw wood as usually needing a little bit of extra clear. Right there, right around the middle. Other than that, that looks like it'll be, it's probably ready for the clear. All right, we're ready to put the coat of clear on this part. Our stab looks like it's just, there's no real, not that I can see here. Actually, right here is the only dry spot. Let's see if we can candle this. If you can see this. This is the only dry spot here that's going to need a little bit. So what I'm going to do is make a little mental note. Then this is the upper surface, of course, so we want this perfect. Well, we want the whole thing perfect. But when I start sanding this down, is go over this area very lightly, go over everything, and then a little bit of extra clear up on there. The other side I don't think has, of course it always has to be on the top. That's the way it always works out. Now this is one area right away that I can see is going to be a little bit of an issue, is the paint buildup around the horn here. I don't want it to tear away and take a big chunk of finish with it. So I'm trying to take a new blade and get right in by the horn so I can maintain a little clearance there and scrape some of the paint off of that horn. And it's right in that little crease that it's going to be a problem. And that's what it's going to do. It's going to start building up paint in there more than what I want. I would like to be able to get a little piece of sandpaper in there if I could. And keep most of this extra paint off of here until we're actually done. Now let's just see for an example. It's too tight to get sandpaper in there. I'm going to have to work this. There we go. Well, I'd like to have that I could get, if you can see what I'm doing, get the sandpaper behind the horn, just so we have a little bit of clearance here. Yeah, this side is not wanting to cooperate. Now I can tell when I've got most of it out is when I've got rid of I don't want to put any oil or grease or anything in there right now. Yeah, I think that'll be fine. Now I can get in there and sand that little area. And take something with a hard edge. One of the little details that we have to constantly monitor all through the finish is keeping that horn from building up a big giant amount of paint that we don't want around that surface in that both sides. And this is what I ultimately wind up with, is I can get the sandpaper right up to the bushing, and then I know I have a good amount of clearance in there. Now the rest of this is going to be pretty redundant, and I just wanted to show one little spot because it's the detailing that takes time, not sanding out the big flat surfaces. The big flat surfaces usually go pretty quickly anyway, but the detailing, the edges, the corners, keeping a lot of big sloppy paint from working its way in by the horn there. And if I can just get across what looks like the right amount of silver for the first coat and get an idea of how long this should take. It's 600 sandpaper, soapy water with a little bit of dish soap in it. If you can buy M600, of course, that's great, but thanks to the lovely EPA in New Jersey, we can only buy water. Then when I get the whole surface to look like that, and that's what I'm aiming for, is just to look like that. When I get both sides to look like that, and all these edges detailed out, and the horn nice and free, this part will be, and what I decided to do is just wait and spray them all at once. Now we wound up this little spot that I thought was not as bad as it was, but it was a little bit deeper, and I've gone through the tissue and kind of into the wood, and I can tell by the feel that that's going to be a problem, but there's a way to make the repair of it a lot easier, and I wanted to show this tip where I know it's that I've gone through anywhere near it, and you can almost see it for now. And what that does, you just let that dry. Dry sand it now, no wet. Do not sand that with wet. Let that kick by itself. That'll save. It'll save putting 5 coats of clear on there, I hope. Now once it kicks, you can actually feel when you go through the tissue like that. I can feel it anyway. And just the slightest sanding, because we know we're going to sand this back down again, and the sandpaper is only there to give this a little bit of a tooth. Because all I care about is, let's see if that's, oh yeah, that's nice and smooth now. Remember, when you break through to the wood, the problem is the water that you're using, or M600, gets down in there. So I want to seal that right away. Just slightly dust it off, ever so slightly. I get the elevators sanded, we'll be ready to spray. And the elevators look like there's no dry spots on this one. This one has a few dry spots up here. I can see a little bit of a wrinkle. It looks like that was a run in the paint. But again, this may just need one extra coat of clear. If it does, we'll know as soon as we start sanding it down. This one looks ready to go. Now, I'm not sure what the temperature's up to there, but it's supposed to be above freezing, but I don't know. There's still ice on the pond. We're going to see in a minute or so. Now, without the sun out, it's a little difficult handling this stuff. I have to kind of look at it. Missing any spots? No. Not sure, see, there's no sunlight, so you really can't candle it. Yeah, you don't have any trouble when you shoot the silver. It's when you shoot the clear and there's no sun to candle by. It gets a little iffy. Not something you can't deal with, just a little bit annoying. I'm going to try to look down there and see if I can see that. And it's one bad spot here. I know I'm going to have to get some extra clear. I may have to come out and just put an extra coat on that where I sealed it up. Now, of course, the tricky spot with this is to get that last little bit. A little extra on the edges. Now we know where we need the extra on this. Get a little bit extra on there. Up there was a dry spot. As time consuming and labor intensive as this can be, in my estimation, it beats having that overweight plane that's tail heavy and you just never seem to get trimmed out. And I think every one of us has built one of those that just has that extra, the kiss of death finish. And that is frustrating. And there's really not much you can do about it either. Once you've got that paint on, except sand and buff it off, and it sure is a lot easier not to put it on in the first place. Well, it's really difficult when you don't have any sun. Really only with the clear on. And if we miss a spot with the clear, it's going to show right through in the silver, so not really a big deal. Now we're going to let this dry a couple hours and hopefully get the silver on today if the weather holds up. So far so good. So far so good. This time of year I just take whatever they give me. Now the problem is the weather report is saying it's a good chance it's going to rain this afternoon late, so I don't like to let this dry as long as possible, but I want to get that silver on today. Well, believe it or not, the sun actually came out in the last half an hour or so. We're going to try to get some silver on. I could have used this sun when, when we were doing clear. I want to get those spots that we know need a little extra. Get a little bit extra on there. A dry spot right there. Look around for any other spots that maybe we missed. It's a little dry over here. All the edges, extra on all the edges, of course. Gets redundant, but once you have that, I guess, in the bank is the right word. There's really, the thing that always amazes me about finishing is it's really not like sending a rocket to the moon. It's a lot more like coal mining or something where you just got to do it. Here comes the sun. Look at this. Now, where were you when I needed you? Now I'll put the second coat right on top of this. Yeah, it's going to look pretty decent. And as long as you're willing to sand silver, I would almost be willing to guarantee you're going to have big giant gains in your finishing, because most of them come from just being willing to sand the silver, sand it the right way, and not try to take the shortcut to grandma's. Now this is really, I've lowered the pressure and thinned this out a little bit because I just want to get on a thin coat. I'm not trying to fill any grain here or anything. Oh, there is one spot right there. I may have to fill that with, that looks like I'm going to, right in the back of the fillet, it's going to have to get filled with a little bit of that red putty. I'm not going to be able to fill that much with paint. But you're always better getting it on like what I'm doing now, low pressure, thin material, and getting on 2 or 3 thin coats just lays down better. And all those edges. You can see the sun. Boy, the sun. How nice to see that sun. Now this part, I know I have this one bad spot that I'm dealing with. It's on the top surface, right out here. So what I'll try to do is get a little extra material out there. Remember, it's going on nice and thin now. Just let that dry while I do the bottom. When it's going on thin like this, I can just hold the trigger down and just keep putting it on. Now what I'm seeing out at the spot where I put the extra silver will give me a chance to show one of the tentative problems you can have. See how it's, I don't know if you can see this, if you can see how it's loosening up the silk span. I'm not sure we're going to have to show that down in the shop, but right here it's like the silk span is not attached as well as it should. I'll put a little extra material on it, but that's not going to do any good. What we're going to have to do is put a bunch of little pinholes in there, probably. Get the silk span to lay down. And what usually causes that is you either have some contamination there or you've touched it with your finger without a rubber glove on, in which case, and sometimes in sanding it, there's some contamination on the sandpaper. But that looks like just one spot out of this whole area, that one spot. Let's see if you can see it up there. If you can just see it, that's going to be the only one we have to deal with. And now it's just this spot. I'm going to wet that down a little bit extra. But I know that once this all shrinks down, and we're not going to be able to do much more with it today, that area is going to have to be worked on. That'll give us an opportunity to show the proper repair for that at some, well, it's going to dry a day or so anyway. But it seems no matter how careful you are, there's always little spots that need to be touched up. And the important thing is knowing how to get through these. So it's like, once you can get through these, it doesn't matter how many you have, you can just get through them. But it's really the endless cycle of putting the silver on and making it as perfect as you want it to be. And needless to say, that can be anything from that's good enough to multiple concourse wins. It's really up to you. All I need to do is decide ahead of time, and of course Joe and I hopefully have decided to really put our best effort into this whole project. And maybe even along the way inspire you to do the same thing. Maybe that's how that'll work. I don't know. I love having this silver on. It'll be drying. And by the way, tomorrow is Joe's visit. I got to get ready for Joe, get all his stuff ready. So our goal tomorrow is to try to get the wing and a fuselage. If all goes well, we're going to get an early start as we always do. Nothing better than a nice early start. And always a good day working with Joe, of course. Well, we're at the end of this tape, and as always, what we're looking forward to is seeing that silver dry up, seeing Joe early tomorrow morning. He'll be ready to put his wing in a fuselage, and probably by the end of next week, or a few days into it anyway, the hope that we have is that we're going to be ready to start our wing. And while we're doing that, all our silver will be drying up. And boy, so far, this project has really excited me like never before. And I hope you've been enjoying and picking up some little things that you can use to make your modeling even more fun. And we're already looking forward to Brodax. Karen and Shelley just made the reservation for Brodax. Anyway, there's not many things more exciting to me than sanding out that silver and seeing those last coats, each coat getting better and better and better. It's a lot of work, it's a lot of labor, not a lot of high skill stuff going on, but the result is always the same. The day you put the real color on, it looks so much better than the silver. You're always glad you did it. Anyway, tip of the day. And we will see you on the next DVD.